The following story was posted in reply to this photo on r/nocontextpictures by user zenfish. When I was 17, I spent a few months slumming in the grime of New Taipei. I was supposed to be staying with my well-to-do uncle in his loft on the hills overlooking Jinyi, but something about the grimy Panachiao, or Panachiao as it was then, spoke to me. Perhaps there is comfort to be found down there in the dizzying apartment blocks where my other uncle, the family fuck-up, kept a small apartment. If I believe the family lore, 10 years back this particular uncle had been committed after a nervous breakdown and due to the stigma of mental illness in Taiwan, had been treated like a plague ever since. He was an outbreak that appeared every few years and my family would throw money at it hoping for a cure. He would turn up at my other uncle's doorstep and receive a few 100,000 NT and then slink back to the slummy side of the river. I hated the isolated loft in the nice part of town, elevated in the mountains above, even the downtown skyscrapers, but I loved Panachiao. It was how I learned to love my tiny island homeland, through the sheer density of its interesting things, the noise and blood and guts of a morning market, the dogs surf riding on the footboards of their owners' motor scooters, the distinctive raw sewage smell of sticky tofu, or just raw sewage, giving way to the heavenly scent of frying morning's pot stinkers, or danbing, the way the rays of sunrise cut through the dust of a rug beating out into the alleyway. Then one day, 200,000 NT freshly in hand, my uncle said, "Let's get out of the city." We took a couple of scooters and rode up into the mountains. We stopped at roadside stands along the way and bought the best tasting fruit I've ever eaten. Branch-ripened guavas and lianwu in striped plastic bags. We took our haul up the mountains again. We sped along the winding mountain roads with busted safety mirrors at a hairpin turn, nearly kissing side views with passing cars or being run off cliff drops by livery trucks. We ended up in a place both alien and somewhat familiar. I had the deep sense I'd been there before, and I had. It was my grandfather's cemetery. The tombs terraced down the mountainside, like an auditorium of the dead. We found my yeye's grave and began cleaning, and I realized that Uncle Fuck-Up was the answer to my family's long-standing mystery of why yeye's grave was always so clean on tomb sweeping day. We burned paper money and lit incense that we held to our heads while prostrating. We placed fruit offerings while the incense burned down to the sand, and we cleaned and swept. Afterwards, we sat there on the low marble wall of the tomb and ate the fruit, the guavas, and lianwu, so their essence would ripen in the afterlife for my grandfather. Then we got back on our bikes and beat south, deeper into the mountains. We rode for hours until my legs felt like falling off, and we stopped at some shady-looking hot springs. We paid for the equivalent of $10 and cute Xiao Jie covered our bodies in muddy white slip and rinsed it off in ice-cold spring water and helped us climb into tubs of successively hotter and hotter sulfur-smelling water. Then my uncle winked, and more bills changed hands, and the cutest Xiao Jie whisked me off to the private bath so that the little wide-eyed boy would forever stay here, in Taiwan. It was late and getting dark before we left, content in just about all the ways a person could be, except for maybe spiritual. So Uncle Fuck-Up had me follow him further south and further up. Always up. It was almost pitch black before we got to our destination, a deserted outdoor cafe, hidden at the highest place on the spine of a mountain. I found out from my uncle that they used to grow the addictive and mouth-numbing betel nut, but now grew coffee on the mountain, and the owners of the coffee plantation had opened up the mountain cafe, hoping for publicity. My uncle laughed and pointed down the spine of the mountain, and my eyes picked up the lights of other joints, and he told me that all the other betel nut growers had gotten the same idea. We sat there on the lawn atop the mountain sipping coffee while surrounded by a freaky diorama of miniatures taken from a nearby mini-golf course that had folded, the shadows of garden fairies and gnomes, and other storybook creatures thrown large by low lighting over the grass. Finally, my uncle had the manager turn down the lights, and I realized that beside the sealed capsule that had borne me there, at that moment, in that seat on the top of the mountain was not closest necessarily to a god I did not believe in, but the closest I'd ever been to the less visible yet greater part of our universe. Of course, I forgot to ask Uncle Fuck-Up all of the questions that I'd been meaning to, such as what had made him go crazy and drop out of the family business, and where he went when he disappeared, and if he was ashamed to be living on family handouts. I doubted that he was ashamed, especially because I was beginning to realize how unhappy everyone else in my family of overachieving workaholics had become. And I often wondered, after that night, if he had his own happiness secreted away somewhere none of us could reach, on a mountaintop, or beyond the pervasive blanket of gloomy cloud cover on our island. A few years later, he stopped showing up for handouts, and there was great speculation among my family that Uncle Fuck-Up had finally offed himself. I don't think so, however, because our great family mystery persists, due in part to my desire to keep this story only to myself. Each tomb sweeping day, the members of my family arrive to my Yeye's pristine grave, puzzled by the spotless marble surfaces, the cooling ashes of joss paper in the oven, and the remains of guava and lian wu rotting in the grass.